It started innocently enough. Jessica had invited a few of her friends over for a casual evening. "Just drinks," she said. "A little get-together to catch up." I thought it would be simple, even relaxing. After all, I'd met most of these women before, and things had always been cordial. But I should have known that casual invitations rarely stayed casual when they involved Jessica's friends. As soon as they arrived at our ranch-style house on Willow Creek Drive in Tulsa, I could feel the shift. There were 5 of them, chatty, confident, quick with smiles that seemed genuine but carried an edge I didn't expect. I offered a handshake to each, keeping my tone light and friendly. But as soon as Jessica turned to get the drinks, the questions began. Not questions in the polite sense, but a barrage, a kind of verbal inspection. "So, you're the one she's been telling us about?" one of them asked, tilting her head, her eyes scanning me up and down like a professional critic reviewing a performance. I nodded, trying to meet her gaze calmly. "Yes, that's me." That was all I said, but apparently it wasn't enough. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of pointed comments, subtle digs, and veiled criticisms. One questioned my career choices. Another mocked my hobby of working on old cars. And yet another brought up how different my lifestyle was compared to the friends they thought I should have. Each statement was wrapped in a polite tone, but the message was clear. I didn't measure up. Jessica's friends didn't even notice the undercurrent of tension they were creating. And Jessica herself seemed oblivious at first, sipping her wine and laughing at jokes I barely understood. But I noticed everything. The way they compared me to some imaginary standard. The way they dissected my words, my clothes, my gestures, and even the way I laughed. It was relentless, like being under a microscope with no escape, and yet, through it all, I remained calm. Not out of fear or submission, but by choice. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to defend myself aggressively. I listened, letting them reveal their judgments fully, almost theatrically. I realized something then. Their time and energy were their own. But I controlled mine. If they wanted to tear down my character, they would have to do it calmly against someone who refused to react. By the end of the evening, Jessica's friends were exhausted, visibly searching for some reaction they couldn't get. I simply smiled, nodded occasionally, and responded with calm, measured words whenever they asked me directly. There were no fights, no raised voices, just a quiet, undeniable presence that made their attempts to belittle me look suddenly petty. After nearly 2 hours of relentless commentary, I could sense the frustration building in the room. Jessica's friends had tried every angle. My work ethic, my hobbies, the way I dressed, even my sense of humor. Each observation was delivered like a verdict from some unspoken jury. And yet I didn't flinch. I stayed seated, posture straight, voice steady, eyes meeting theirs without hesitation. The calmness itself became a subtle rebuke, one they hadn't anticipated. One of them, a woman named Claire, leaned in closer, lowering her voice as if to deliver a secret she expected would sting. "You know, for someone who works with his hands all day, you're, well, kind of rough around the edges." I smiled politely, nodded, and replied, "I like being hands-on. It keeps me grounded." Nothing more. No defensiveness, no over-explaining. My simplicity and self-assurance made her words lose their bite. Another friend, Megan, tried a different tactic. "And your sense of style. Jessica really has a taste for the finer things. Do you even notice?" She gestured to my simple jeans and shirt, fully expecting me to stumble, maybe apologize or over-justify. I looked at her directly, calmly, and said, "I do notice, and I dress the way I'm comfortable. It works for me." That brief statement, so unshaken, seemed to take the air out of her critique. Even subtle digs about Jessica and me were attempted. "It's cute that you fix her ideas about household projects, but sometimes maybe you let her lead." Another small jab, attempting to highlight some supposed imbalance in our marriage. I only smiled and said, "Jessica has amazing ideas. I enjoy helping where I can." Simple, honest, confident. Not a single defensive word. I noticed something then. Their attacks were fueled by the assumption that I would react emotionally, that if they said enough, I would falter. But the calmness, the refusal to be rattled, made each critique dissolve in the air. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the atmosphere shifted. Their energy went from confident and probing to uncertain, like children realizing their game wasn't working. Jessica, who had been laughing along with them earlier, finally seemed aware of the tension she had invited. I could see the faintest flicker of admiration, or at least surprise, cross her face. Not because I had won an argument, but because I had refused to play the game entirely. My calm, measured presence had spoken louder than words ever could. By the time they left, I was still seated sipping my drink, letting the silence settle in the room. No raised voices, no dramatic confrontations, just quiet strength. Jessica's friends had spent 2 hours dissecting my flaws, and in the end, their judgments had crumbled without me ever needing to escalate. And as I watched them leave slightly flustered, I realized something important. Composure, confidence, and clarity can speak louder than any defense or argument. After they left, the house on Willow Creek Drive felt unusually quiet. Jessica came over, her hand brushing lightly against mine as if to gauge my mood. I looked at her, letting a small, knowing smile form. "Well," I said softly, "that was interesting." She laughed a little nervously, realizing the calm that had unnerved her friends wasn't fake. "You handled them well," she admitted. "I didn't expect you to just sit there." I shrugged lightly. I don't react to criticism the way most people do. It rarely achieves anything. Her eyes lingered on me, a mix of amusement, surprise, and something else. Respect, maybe. "They were relentless," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone could stay that composed." I tilted my head, meeting her gaze steadily. Calmness isn't just about staying quiet. It's about seeing the intent behind the words, understanding the game, and choosing how to respond. Everything else is just noise. I could see the lesson had landed subtly but firmly. Jessica's friends had spent hours trying to unsettle me, but they left with their assumptions shattered. They hadn't expected patience, clarity, or quiet strength. Their words, meant to pierce and provoke, had met a barrier they hadn't accounted for: self-assurance. And in that realization, the dynamics of the evening shifted. Jessica's laughter returned, lighter now, more genuine. "You made them speechless," she said, almost teasing. "And I think they might rethink how they talk about me and you next time." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "It's not about making them rethink me. It's about knowing who I am and refusing to let others define me with their judgments." She nodded, silent for a moment, as if letting the idea sink in fully. Later, when we were alone, I reflected on the evening. The energy, the criticisms, the subtle attempts to destabilize me. It all served as a reminder. Life often presents situations where others try to define us, challenge our choices, or question our worth. The real power lies not in reacting, but in maintaining composure, understanding the situation, and choosing measured, confident responses. By the time Jessica and I went to bed, the tension had transformed into a quiet victory, one that required no shouting, no drama, and no unnecessary confrontation. I realized then that calmness isn't just a tactic, it's a way of life. It shows self-respect, self-awareness, and strength. That night, I didn't just survive a barrage of criticism. I turned it into a subtle but undeniable statement about who I was. And that statement, more than any words, left an impression that would linger far longer than the fleeting judgments of others.